When the cab turned the corner and I saw my house, I felt my heart stop. Not from the thrill of coming home from the hospital, but from the gut punch of reality waiting for me on the curb. All my furniture was there, piled up like trash. The sofa where I'd slept during the nights my wife was fading, the table where my son learned to read, the old wall clock that had marked every birthday. Everything was outside. And there, fluttering among the tossed-out clothes, was a photo of me, smeared with dirt, the frame broken. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure this is the place, mister?" he asked, uncomfortable. I couldn't answer him. I just nodded. The stroke I'd had months back had stolen part of my voice, my strength, and my pride, but not my soul. That was still intact. I got out slowly. My cane sank into the mud, and the air smelled like dampness and betrayal. A group of neighbors watched from the corner, whispering. A woman approached and touched my shoulder. "Michael," she said, "your son was here this morning. He said you weren't coming back." I didn't understand at first. "What did he say?" I managed to ask, my voice raspy. He thought you had passed away, so he decided to clean out the house." I took a deep breath, so deep it felt like it burned my lungs. And then he appeared. My son, Julian. He was walking up from the corner with a bag in his hand, wearing the same indifference as always. When he saw me, he stopped. "Oh, you're back," he said, no surprise in his voice. "You look better than I thought." I didn't answer. I don't even know how I managed to stay on my feet. The silence got so thick, I could hear the wind hitting the furniture. Julian glanced at the curb, shrugging. "Don't be mad, Dad. I didn't think you were coming back. That stuff was useless anyway." He looked at me with that arrogant half-smile he'd inherited from his mother. "Besides, the house looks bigger this way." I don't know how long I stood there looking at him. His face, so much like mine and yet so alien, reminded me of everything I had given and everything he had taken. I, who raised him alone, who broke my back to put him through school, who gave up everything to see him happy. And now, here he was, standing in front of me, justifying my early burial. But I said nothing. Not yet. I just leaned my hand on my cane, looked at my furniture tossed on the curb and felt something inside me, something old, patient, and quiet, begin to wake up. Julian went into the house without even offering to help me. "I'm heading to work," he said. "If you want, you can put your stuff away, though honestly, I doubt any of it's worth saving." He left, whistling, leaving the door open. The echo of his footsteps faded, and only then did I dare to go inside. The interior was a skeleton. The walls were bare, the floor covered in dust. Every corner seemed like a memory ripped violently away. The spot where Lucy's picture used to hang had a lighter mark on the paint, like a wound. I moved forward, leaning on my cane, until I reached the bedroom. The old mattress was gone, so was the dresser. Only a wooden box was left on the floor. I recognized that box immediately. Lucy had used it to keep family mementos, the letters we wrote when I was working at the factory, photos of Julian as a boy, his school medals. I knelt as best I could and opened it. Inside, there was still a faint smell of lavender. The letters were yellowed but intact. Underneath, I found something else. A sealed envelope with the old logo of the Southern Trust Bank and a note in my wife's fine handwriting. "Michael, if you ever need to start over, here is everything we saved together." I froze, the envelope in my hand. I didn't understand. I didn't remember this money. I didn't remember leaving anything but my exhaustion and my years at that bank. But Lucy had always been a planner. Maybe, even after she was gone, she was still taking care of me. I carefully tucked the envelope into my coat pocket. I sat on an empty box and looked around. The empty house seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to do something. Teresa, my neighbor, came in quietly. "I brought you some hot soup, Michael," she said tenderly. "You shouldn't be here alone." I smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Teresa. I'll manage." "How could your son do this?" she asked, outraged. "After everything you sacrificed for him?" I didn't know what to answer. Sometimes the simplest questions hurt the most. She looked at me for a moment, then lowered her voice. "Don't you worry, Michael. God sees everything." I nodded. "I know, Teresa, but this time, God won't be the only one watching. Her expression changed. Something in my voice made her take a half step back. What do you mean? I gave a slight smile without answering. I'm just saying, you don't die when someone takes your things. You die when you forget who you are. And I still remember. I didn't sleep that night. My body was shaking, not from the stroke, but from contained rage. I heard the door open around midnight. Julian was back. He was laughing on the phone with someone. He said things like, "Yeah, the space is cleared out. I start selling tomorrow." And in that instant, I knew my house was no longer my house, but I also knew that my story wasn't over. I got up slowly. I looked out the window at the empty sidewalk and whispered to the air, "Lucy, it looks like we'll have to teach one last lesson." And in my chest, where there were no tears left, a cold, dangerous, bright calm began to grow. The calm of a man who has decided not to die without justice. Dawn found me sitting in the empty kitchen, Teresa's soup now cold on the table. The silence in the house was so thick it seemed to have weight. No clock, no radio, no voice. Just the sound of the wind coming through a broken window and the creak of my cane against the floor. I looked at my trembling hands. They still held the marks of effort, of the years of work in the woodshop, of the sleepless hours to give Julian what he asked for. Every wrinkle was a memory, and every scar a story he had forgotten. In the hospital, they had told me to avoid strong emotions. "Watch your pressure, Michael," the nurses kept saying. "But how do you avoid pain when the one hurting you shares your blood? How do you rest your heart when the blow comes from inside your own home?" Outside, the furniture was still piled up like silent witnesses. The sofa, the chairs, the broken photos, everything that was once my life, now exposed to the sun in front of the neighbors. I saw a stray dog sniffing among my things, biting a piece of the cushion where Lucy used to sit, and something inside me broke. I took a breath, got up with difficulty, and went out onto the porch. The neighbors pretended not to look, but I could feel their eyes on me. Some wanted to help, others just wanted to watch the show. Among them, I saw Teresa crossing the street with a thermos in her hand. "Good morning, Michael," she said in her sweet voice. "I brought you some fresh brewed coffee." "You shouldn't have bothered, Teresa." "It's no bother." She left the thermos on the low wall. "I couldn't stay home knowing you were here all alone." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the sidewalk full of memories. "I never imagined your son was capable of something like this," she murmured. "Neither did I replied. "But children aren't born ungrateful, Teresa. They're made." She looked at me, intrigued. "And who makes them that way?" "Life, I suppose. And parents who love too much." Her eyes welled up. "You know, Michael, my son also left years ago. He doesn't call, he doesn't write. Sometimes I think getting old just means becoming invisible to the ones you raised." "No, Teresa," I said quietly. "Getting old isn't about becoming invisible. It's about seeing too much and not being able to say anything." We were quiet for a while. The sun was starting to warm the street, and the smell of coffee suddenly brought back the memory of Lucy. She always said the smell of coffee was the perfume of new beginnings. Maybe that was exactly what I needed. A beginning. My gaze returned to the wooden box I had left in the kitchen. The bank envelope was still inside, waiting. "Teresa, could you stay here for a moment?" I asked. "Of course. Are you going out?" "Just to the bank. I need to find something out." The walk to the Southern Trust Bank felt endless. Every step with the cane was a reminder of my fragility, but also of my determination. The employees looked at me with respect, maybe with pity. I approached the counter and handed over the envelope. "Good morning," I said, forcing myself to speak clearly. "This account was in the name of Michael Gomez. I'd like to know if it still exists." The young woman at the counter checked her computer. "Yes, sir. It's active, but..." She looked at me with surprise. "There's something else." "What is it?" "There's a recurring deposit listed from many years ago with accumulated interest. Quite significant, I'd say." I lost my breath. Lucy. That woman had been wiser than all of us. While I was wearing myself out working, believing the future depended on my son, she had secured my old age without saying a word. "Can I access that money?" I asked. "Yes, of course, but you'll need to update your ID and sign some papers." "I'll do whatever's necessary." As I signed, the young woman said, You're very lucky, Mr. Gomez. Not many people plan for their future like this. I looked her in the eye and replied, "It wasn't luck. It was love." When I left the bank, the fresh air hit my face. I didn't feel joy or relief. I felt something different. Clarity. For the first time in a long time, I had something my son couldn't touch or sell or throw in the trash. I had control. I had dignity. I walked slowly back home, thinking about everything that money represented. I could move, start a new life, but I could also use it for something else, to teach him a lesson he would never forget. When I arrived, Teresa was sweeping the sidewalk. "How did it go, Michael?" "Well, more than well. I'm glad." "Teresa?" I said, with a calm that surprised even me. "Do you believe in justice?" "Of course I do, even if it takes its time." "Sometimes it doesn't come on its own," I replied. "Sometimes you have to lead it by the hand." She looked at me, not quite understanding, but with that intuition good souls have. She knew something had changed in me. "Be careful, Michael. Don't do anything that will hurt you." "Don't worry," I smiled. "I'm just going to get back what's mine." That night, as the wind blew hard and the neighborhood lights went out one by one, I opened the bank envelope on the table. Inside were the statements, the numbers, Lucy's signature, and in a corner, a smaller piece of paper with her handwriting. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means you're alone, but it also means you still have the strength to start over. Don't use this money to survive. Use it to remember who you are." I stroked those words as if they were her face, and I understood that my wife hadn't left me money. She had left me power, the power to decide my ending, and also to write the beginning of the lesson my son would never forget. I closed the box, turned off the lamp, and looked at the ceiling. The echo in the house no longer sounded so empty. For the first time since the stroke, I didn't feel like a sick man. I felt like a man with a purpose. Tomorrow, I thought, the rest of my life begins. And this time, I don't plan on leaving it tossed on the curb. I barely slept that night. It wasn't the insomnia of an old man complaining about pain or cold. It was something else, a silent fire that kept me awake, something like hope or maybe revenge. The wooden box was on the table, lit by the yellow glow of the small lamp. I had made it myself more than 30 years ago, when Lucy and I had just gotten married. I remember how she patiently varnished it, wiping it with a small cloth in her small hands, smiling at me and saying, "This will hold everything we don't want to lose." I never imagined it would end up holding what would save my life. I ran my fingers over the surface. The smell of old varnish was still there, mixed with that sweet scent I always associated with her. I opened the lid slowly, and the memories jumped out as if they had been waiting for this moment for decades. There were photos, letters, medals, old receipts. Every paper held the weight of a day of my life. I found a letter folded inside an ivory-colored envelope. It was from Lucy, dated 1998. The handwriting was firm, rounded, full of that elegance only women who learn to write with love possess. It said, "Michael, if this box ever falls into your hands when you are alone, don't cry. Don't think I left you. I will be in every decision you make if you make it with a clear heart. Promise me one thing, that you will never let anyone treat you like a burden, that you will never allow the love you gave to become a debt." I kept reading those lines over and over. Lucy knew me too well. She knew I could stand physical pain, but not humiliation. And that was exactly what Julian had done. Humiliated me. Reduced me to a piece of old furniture. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand and kept looking through the box. Among the photos I found something else, a small notebook with a worn cover. It was the notebook where Lucy kept the household accounts. Every page was a meticulous record of our expenses, our savings, our hopes. And at the end, there was a list with a single word written in all caps, "Fund." Below it was an address for the Southern Trust Bank, an account number, and a brief note. "Monthly deposits. Keep in reserve. Purpose, Michael's security." I took a deep breath. So it hadn't been an accident. My wife had prepared everything in silence, without telling me, to protect me even after her death. This woman who cooked with the radio on, singing old songs, had been my guardian angel without me even knowing it. But what impressed me most was that at the bottom of the page, in her firm handwriting, she had added, "If Julian loses his way, let life teach him. Don't save him. Only then will he understand what it means to have a father." I closed my eyes. The air escaped my chest as if I'd been hit again. Lucy had seen it coming. Years ago, she already knew what her son would become, and even so, she had left me the tools to survive him. The next day, I sat on the porch with the box on my lap. Teresa showed up early, as always, with her thermos of coffee and that curious look that needs no words. "Did you find something, Michael?" she asked. "Yes," I replied without taking my eyes off the box. "More than I imagined." "And is that good or bad?" "Depends," I said with a half smile. "For me, good. For others, not so much." She smiled too, though she didn't fully understand. "Don't think about revenge, Michael. Hate makes you sick." "No, Teresa," I shook my head gently. "This isn't hate. It's memory." "And what do you plan to do?" "I don't know yet. But Lucy left me a path, and I plan to follow it." Teresa looked at me for a moment, as if she wanted to say something, but held back. Then she sighed. "Whatever it is, do it calmly. People who act with a clean heart always win, even if it takes time." When she left, I went into the house and headed to the desk. I spread all the papers on the table, ordering them by date. As I did, something caught my eye. In one of the bank letters, there was a mention of a preferred investment plan, with automatic renewal every 10 years. The signature was from an old manager, a man named Robert Miller, a man I remembered from my working years. He had been my buddy at the factory before he moved up, a straight shooter, a man of his word. I looked him up that same afternoon. The bank's operator connected me to his office. His voice sounded older, but still strong. "Michael Gomez?" he said, surprised. "How long has it been, old friend?" "Robert, I need to see you," I replied. "It's about a fund my wife left here years ago." "Of course. Come by tomorrow. And don't worry. I remember those papers. Your wife was more organized than the bank itself." I hung up and stared at the box. Lucy had left everything in order, even the right people. It was as if she had planned every step. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled from the heart. Julian came home late that night. He said nothing when he came in, just turned on the TV, opened a beer, and flopped onto the new sofa he had bought. He glanced at me, uninterested. "Did you go to the bank, Dad?" he asked. He caught me by surprise. "How did you know?" "Teresa told me." He smiled with disdain. "Nosy old woman." I didn't respond. I just watched him. There was something in his tone that confirmed what I already suspected. He knew there was money. Maybe he was even planning to take it for himself. I planted my cane on the floor, leaned toward him, and said quietly, "Yes, I went to the bank. But don't you worry, son. There's nothing there that would interest you." He let out a dry laugh. "Don't underestimate me, old man. Everything you have will be mine, sooner or later." I stayed quiet. It wasn't worth arguing. But as I watched him drink with such arrogance, I understood something that calmed me. He didn't know it was already too late, that the game had started, and this time I had designed the board. That night before sleeping, I opened the notebook one more time. I ran my hand over Lucy's name, engraved on the first page, and whispered, "You promised you'd take care of me. And you are." Then I added a new sentence in pencil, below her last note. "He who forgets his roots deserves to lose his shadow." I closed the box, turned off the light, and let the darkness wrap around me. For the first time since the stroke, I slept without fear. Not because there was no danger, but because I knew I was no longer the one in danger. They say you never forget the day your son is born, and it's true. I can still hear Julian's first cry as he took his first breath, the tremor in my hands when I held him, the shine in Lucy's eyes as she cradled him. "He's just like you," she told me. And I, without knowing why, cried, not from fear or joy, but from a feeling I didn't understand back then, the responsibility of creating someone who would either surpass you or destroy you. Julian grew up fast. He was a curious, smart kid, the pride of the neighborhood. Lucy dressed him carefully, took him to school every morning, and in the afternoons he would run to me when I got home from work, yelling, "Dad, look what I drew!" His drawings were simple, But there was always a house with 3 people and a dog we never had. Sometimes I think that on those papers was the family he wanted to keep, and that over the years, without knowing it, he learned to despise it. When Lucy got sick, Julian was 15, too young to understand death, but old enough to fear it. I tried to stay strong, to not show my anguish, but the days fell on me like an endless rain. Lucy, with her soft voice, would tell me, "Don't let him see your pain. Children imitate what you show them." And so I did. I saved every tear for when he was asleep. I buried every worry behind a forced smile. But when she died, something in Julian changed. He stopped looking me in the eye. He no longer said, "Dad." He said, "Michael." It was as if my name separated him from childhood, as if saying it made him feel like an adult. At first, I thought it was a phase. Adolescence, grief, the emptiness. But the years passed, and instead of healing, that distance became a habit. I remember the day I paid for his college. I'd saved every penny working overtime, fixing furniture on the side, taking jobs my body couldn't really handle anymore. I gave him the money in an envelope. He took it without looking at me. "Thanks, Michael," he said, without emotion. It didn't hurt that he called me by my name. It hurt that his voice didn't have an ounce of gratitude. For years I believed my duty was to give him everything. But I didn't understand that there's an invisible line where limitless love turns into poison. I spoiled him with sacrifices, and he grew up believing he deserved everything without any effort. When he graduated, he barely called. I only found out through third parties that he had gotten a good job. I, with the clumsy pride of a humble parent, kept telling myself, as long as he's okay, that's enough. But it wasn't enough, because the first time he came to see me, 3 years later, he didn't come to visit. He came to ask for money. I remember that afternoon perfectly. I was in the woodshop sanding a table for a client. Julian walked in without a hello, wearing expensive cologne and a leather jacket. "Old man, I need you to lend me something." "How much is something?" I asked without stopping my work. "About 30,000. 30,000 for what?" "An investment," he said with that smile of someone who thinks he's smarter than everyone. "You'll see, I'll get double back." I knew it was a lie. His eyes avoided mine and his voice sounded rushed, but I gave it to him anyway, because in my mind, I still heard Lucy. Never deny him an opportunity. I didn't know then that it would be the last time he asked me for money looking me in the face. The next times, he did it by text or through other people. And when I finally refused, he called me selfish. "I gave you everything," I yelled at him that night, and he replied, "That's exactly why. It's time you gave something back." That sentence pierced my soul. I suddenly understood that the perfect son I had raised didn't exist. All that was left was an empty man, incapable of valuing anything because he never had to fight for anything. Then came the stroke. It was a Sunday afternoon. I remember I was fixing a picture frame and I felt my hand go numb. I fell to the floor and everything went fuzzy. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, surrounded by machines, and next to me was Julian. I thought it was a sign that maybe fate was giving us another chance, but his face didn't show concern. It showed calculation. "Don't move, old man. The doctor says you could get worse," he said, checking his watch. "I'm going to sort out some paperwork." "What paperwork?" I asked with a weak voice. "The insurance, and some things with the house." The nurse looked at me with pity. She understood. I didn't want to. I preferred to believe he was worried about me. Until I got home and found my furniture on the curb. Now, sitting by the window, looking at the empty street, I wonder at what point I lost him. Was it the day I saw him cry for the first time, and I promised to protect him from everything? Or the day I gave him so much that I made him incapable of valuing anything? Maybe we parents don't realize that by sparing our children from pain, we condemn them to a life without empathy. I protected him from hunger, from cold, from sadness, and he grew up believing the world owed him obedience, but not anymore. His time of impunity is over, because now I have something he doesn't: memory, patience, and a box full of secrets that his mother and I built with love. That night, while Julian slept in his room, I stayed awake writing in a new notebook. It wasn't a diary or a letter. It was a kind of testament of the soul, a list of everything that had been taken from me and everything I was going to get back. On the first line, I wrote, "Lucy, we didn't raise a monster, just a son who never learned to be afraid, but I'm going to teach him what it means to lose." I turned off the lamp, leaned my cane against the bed, and smiled. The weak old man who came back from the hospital was dead, and in his place, someone new was born. A man who had learned that patience can be the most dangerous weapon of all. You don't have to be young to learn how to pretend. I discovered that recently when I realized that silence can be more powerful than any word. Since I got back from the hospital, I'd become a spectator in my own house, and that, curiously, gave me the advantage. Men who think they own the world always underestimate those who walk slowly. Julian didn't know I was watching him. He didn't know that behind my every move was an awake mind, attentive, measuring his every gesture, every word, every pause. The son who had written me off was being analyzed by the man who brought him into the world. It all started with something small, a phone call. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard his voice from the living room. "Yeah, it's almost all set," he was saying. "The signature is the only thing missing." His tone was fast, nervous, like someone afraid of being caught. I stood still, not making a sound. "No, don't worry. My father doesn't understand any of this paperwork. He's old," he laughed, and that laugh cut through me like a knife. I didn't go in. I didn't yell. I just waited. I waited like the carpenter who knows the exact sound of wood just before it splits. When he hung up, he looked at me and faked a smile. "What's wrong, old man? Can't sleep?" "No. You should take your pills." "I already took them." I lied. "Well, go rest then. I've got work to do." He went up to his room with his phone in his hand, quickening his pace. I didn't sleep that night. I opened the wooden box again and spread the papers on the table. I needed to understand what he was after. The bank fund was still a mystery to him, but there was a phrase in one of the documents that caught my eye. Real estate assets subject to joint ownership. That meant my house was legally linked to that account, and if anyone tried to sell it, the bank would be notified. There it is, I thought. Lucy had planned for everything, even her son's greed. The next morning he came down late, his phone glued to his ear. Yeah, I can go to the lawyer's office tomorrow," he said while pouring coffee. "No problem, he'll sign." I watched him from the table, pretending to read the newspaper. "Who will sign what?" I asked without looking up. "Nothing important, just some work errands." "Oh, don't butt in, old man." His tone was harsh, authoritarian, and in his eyes I saw what I had never wanted to see. Contempt. It wasn't anger or impatience, it was that cold look of someone who no longer sees you as a person, but as an obstacle. I finished my coffee and got up without a word. My cane hit the floor with a dry, firm sound that made him look at me for a second. "Julian," I said slowly, "you know what my woodworking taught me?" "What?" "That some wood looks solid, but it's rotten on the inside." "And what does that have to do with me?" "Everything," I replied, looking him in the eye. And I went out to the patio without waiting for his answer. In the following days, my suspicions were confirmed. A neighbor, Mr. Roberts, told me he'd seen Julian with a real estate agent, taking pictures of the house. "He said the house was going on sale," the man told me, uncomfortable. "I just assumed you'd agreed." "Thank you, Mr. Roberts," I replied. "But no, I haven't." That same afternoon, I found an envelope in the mailbox. It was a copy of an intent to sell document in the name of Julian Gomez. My signature was on it, forged, but so crudely that he hadn't even bothered to practice it. There it was, the proof. My own son was trying to sell my house while I was still breathing under his roof. I didn't feel anger, I felt clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when you're no longer afraid. And with that calm, I made the most important decision of my life. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. I would let him make his move. I wanted to see him fall under his own weight, just like a rotten branch that snaps without anyone touching it. That night, I called Robert Miller, my old friend from the bank. "Robert, I need your help." "Anything, Michael. I want to protect my house and my account, but without my son finding out." "I understand. We can block any sale attempt without your authorization. Do it. But I need something else. What's that? I want it to look like I don't know anything. Are you planning something? No, Robert, I said, smiling to myself. I'm learning. Robert laughed. You're the same as always, a quiet man with dangerous ideas. Not dangerous, I replied. Just. The following days were a carefully rehearsed play. I pretended to be tired, confused, clumsy. I'd misplace my keys, leave papers out in the open, and pretend not to remember things. Julian relaxed. He'd come down to breakfast whistling, believing everything was under control. One afternoon, while he was on the phone, I heard him say, "We sign tomorrow. If everything goes well, I'll be moving out in 2 weeks." From the patio, I poured myself some tea as if I'd heard nothing. But inside, I was counting the days. That night before bed, I opened the box one more time. Inside was a photo of Julian as a boy. He was 6 years old. He was in my workshop holding a hammer bigger than his hand. He was smiling with pride, telling me, "Look, Dad, I can build too." And now, that same boy was trying to destroy everything we had built. I took the photo and put it in my pocket. Not to remember him, but to remind myself who I was facing. The next morning, I saw him leave early, with an envelope under his arm. The wind rustled the curtains, and the dining room clock struck 8. I waited for him to get further away, then picked up the phone and called the bank. "Robert, it's Michael. I'm listening. It's time. Or, are you sure? Or, more than ever? Then I'll expect you today. Bring the document I got ready for you." I hung up and looked toward the door. The sun was coming through the window, and the dust in the air seemed to glitter, as if someone were guiding me. Lucy, I thought, this is the beginning of the end. I got dressed slowly, took my cane, and left the house. Behind me were the empty walls and the echo of a voice that no longer hurt me. Because from that moment on, the sick old man was definitively dead, and in his place walked a man who was going to teach his own son that the dead can also surprise the living. Patience isn't passivity. It's strategy in winter. I learned that watching Lucy sew, holding her breath as the needle passed through fine cloth. Now, with the box closed beside me and my son's photo in my pocket, I too was weaving a plan that didn't need haste, only time. The bank, Robert, and I. We were the threads, the law, the needle. I went to the Southern Trust Bank with a measured pace, unhurried and unassuming. Robert was waiting in his office, wearing the same kind of tie I remembered from the old days, and a smile that hid both sympathy and caution. "Michael," he said, "are you sure about this?" I nodded. "Yes. But I don't want it to look like revenge. I want it to look like order, legality, so that when it all happens, no one can say it was unfair." I explained in a low voice about the false papers, the intent to sell, the photos of the house, and the calls I'd overheard. Robert frowned. "Your wife left legal safeguards. It's likely that if they try to sell, the bank will block it automatically. But to do that, we need to prepare irrefutable proof of his fraud attempt. And how do we get that without him suspecting? With time and cunning. We'll let him go a little further, sign a few more documents, and when he makes the formal intent, we'll intervene." I left the bank with the strange feeling of someone returning a coin out of righteousness, not spite. I didn't enjoy the idea of humiliating him. I yearned to teach him a lesson that would cleanse him from the inside. As I walked down the avenue, I thought about the concrete steps. First, secure the legal title to the house. Robert said there were protective clauses, but we had to update them. Second, create a public narrative that showed Julian as the one pushing the process, not as an innocent victim. Third, protect the neighbors and Teresa, so no one could say I had manipulated them. In the week that followed, I did what my body allowed. I signed documents at the bank, changed beneficiaries, left precise instructions with my lawyer. Every signature was another stitch in the legal trap, but also an act of liberation. My hand trembled sometimes, but my pulse was no longer fear. It was determination. At night, I reviewed everything in the notebook where I used to write down carpentry orders. Now I wrote down dates, names, reasons. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role of the weak old man. I'd drop books, forget my keys, act confused by papers he left in plain sight. Julian lowered his guard. He spoke about his plans in front of the TV, carelessly, with the confidence that comes from impunity. One evening, I heard him tell someone, "When this goes through, I'm setting up a business and sending you to the beach, old man." His words hit me like salt in a wound. But the key to it all wasn't to open a case against him. It was to use his own pride against him. That's why I spoke discreetly with two women in the neighborhood, Mrs. Martin, who ran the corner store, and Rose, the church secretary. I asked them if they could testify when the time came that it was Julian who was promoting the sale. Both nodded without judgment, with the knowing look of those who have seen honor dragged through the street. I told them, "If that document ever surfaces, please say it loud so people know he was in a hurry to get rid of what was ours." The legal trap also held an emotional trap. I knew that if I left him with nothing abruptly, people would pity him, and I would lose the lesson. So I organized small public gestures. I donated an old chair to the library, repaired the park fence with trembling hands, and with Teresa's help, I organized a community dinner where I gave a speech about hard work and memory. The community saw me as active and generous. If Julian tried to sell the house, he would be the one who looked bad in front of everyone. One of those nights, Robert called. He signed something important. My heart leaped so hard my cane couldn't stop it. "He signed what?" I asked with a calm I struggled to fake. "An intent and power of attorney to represent the sale before a notary. He did it online from his phone, but he made a mistake. He registered it with his work address, not the house address. We have an email chain that links him." I smiled without showing my teeth. "Perfect," I said to myself. Robert proceeded to block any transfer and prepare the documentation to file a challenge when the time came. He explained that the bank would have to act quickly to protect the legitimate owner's assets. From that moment on, the wait became more tense. Every time Julian came down for breakfast, he'd look at my face, searching for a sign. He found nothing. I drank my coffee slowly, savoring the certainty that the story was finally turning in my favor. One day, I accidentally dropped a photograph from the workshop. It showed the three of us, Lucy, me, and an 11-year-old Julian, holding a piece of wood with pride. I found it a moment later. "You still keep that?" he asked, feigning interest. "Just memories," I answered, "and I don't plan on leaving them on the curb again." The plan wasn't cruel. It was educational. I wanted the pride that had let him grow at my expense to become the lesson he needed to not repeat his life. And while the city went on, I finalized the last details. I knew that justice, when it takes human form, can also be merciful. But for mercy to work, there must first be truth. That night, I went to bed with the curious feeling of a man who once again felt in charge of his own destiny. The wooden box rested under the table, closed, silent, and I, with the light off, promised myself I would never again be anyone's shadow. Tomorrow, the warning bell would toll. The rest, I thought, would be history. They say writing a will is accepting the end is near. That's not true. It's more a way of setting the stage for those who stay behind. And I wasn't going to leave this world without putting the pieces in their place. Robert had done his part. The bank was shielded, the house secured, and Julian's movements were being watched. All that was left was the most important part, the written word, the kind that weighs more than years, more than speeches, more even than blood. I looked up the neighborhood lawyer, a discreet man, the kind who still believes in decency. His name was Bennett, and he received me in his small office with a mix of respect and curiosity. "How can I help you, Michael?" "I need to draw up my will, but not a common one. I want it to be instructive." "Instructive?" he asked, smiling. "Yes. I'm not looking to divide money. I'm looking to divide truths." Bennett watched me for a moment, understanding that I was serious. "Very well," he said, opening his folder. "Let's begin." I told him everything, every detail, the abandonment, the betrayal, the covert sale, the hidden fund, Lucy's letters. I left nothing out, and when I finished, the man's eyes were glassy. "That's a tough story, Michael. Not as tough as the lesson my son needs to learn." The will started simply. My information, my house, the fund, my personal items. But then, with Bennett's help, I added the conditions. First, I declared my main heir to be Teresa, the neighbor who had been by my side when no one else was. She would receive the house and a part of the fund with a special clause. If, at the time of my death, my son Julian cannot demonstrate he has assisted or accompanied me, he will automatically lose any right to an inheritance. Bennett looked up. And how will that be proven? With witnesses. The whole neighborhood knows he left me alone. I understand. But that wasn't all. I added a second clause. If my son attempts to contest this document or take any legal action against it, the entire estate will pass to charitable institutions under the name of my wife, Lucy Gomez. That's irreversible, Bennett warned me. It has to be. Finally, I wrote a letter in my own hand to be attached to the document with the instruction that it only be read in the presence of Julian and the witnesses on the day of my death. That letter, more than a goodbye, would be my voice returning from the grave. When I finished, I signed the will with a steady hand. Bennett shook my hand. You've been very clear, Michael, but don't you feel sad, leaving everything outside your family? On the contrary, I replied. I feel relieved. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's memory. That night, the air felt lighter. Teresa came by with hot soup. You look different today, Michael, she said, as if a weight's been lifted from your shoulders. Maybe it has. She sat across from me, her hands folded. You know, I always thought men didn't know how to forgive. Depends on the man, I said. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for balance. And do you think you'll find it? I don't know. But it's enough to know that when I'm gone, everything will go back to its proper place. Teresa looked at me tenderly. Your wife would be proud of you. I hope so, I replied, looking at Lucy's photo on the sideboard. She was the compass. I'm just following the path. Early the next morning, I got up and opened the window. The city was sleeping. The wind brought the smell of fresh bread and distant rain. I thought about Julian, the boy he was, the arrogant young man, the empty man he had become. And I wondered if there was still any kindness in him, something that could be rescued. Because even though I didn't love him as I used to, it still hurt to lose him. I took my cane, went to the wooden box, and placed the will inside, along with Lucy's letters and a new note. If you read this, son, don't look for my money. Look for my truth. I locked the box. The sound of the metal turning was the closing of a chapter, the closing of a wound. The next few days I was calm. I read the paper, walked in the yard, greeted the neighbors. Julian, however, was restless. He took calls, had meetings, reviewed papers. I pretended not to notice, although every time he passed me, I felt his suspicious gaze. One afternoon he said, "Old man, were you at the bank again?" "Yes." "And what did you do there?" "Updated my signature." "Why?" "Because times change, son, and you have to leave everything in order." He laughed, but it sounded strained. "In order for what? Are you planning on dying or something?" "Someday," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "But not today." The silence became uncomfortable. He turned and went upstairs, muttering something I couldn't hear. That was the last time I saw him calm. That night at my desk, I wrote in the notebook again. This time it wasn't plans or calculations. It was a reflection. I wrote, "There is no worse inheritance than guilt, but some people need to receive it to understand the value of forgiveness. I don't want him to suffer. I just want him to wake up." I put the pencil down, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. For the first time since my stroke, I felt no pain, not in my body, not in my soul. It was the feeling of having completed an overdue task, of having transformed a grievance into justice without raising my voice. I looked at the box one last time before turning off the lamp. Lucy would be proud, and although my body felt heavy, my spirit felt light. The board was set. All that was left was for life to move the pieces. The air that afternoon was heavy with foreboding. There was something different in the wind, as if the whole world was bracing for an invisible tremor. I felt it on my skin, in my chest, in the footsteps that echoed too loudly in the hall. Lucy always said you can feel it in your soul before a storm. And that afternoon, I knew. The storm had my son's face. Julian arrived earlier than usual. Not even a hello. He just came in and slammed the door. He was carrying a folder of documents, folded, almost crumpled, as if he had been gripping it in anger the whole way. "What did you do, old man?" was the first thing he said. His voice wasn't a question, it was a threat. "What are you talking about, son?" "Don't call me son," he spat the word. "You know damn well what I'm talking about." He dropped the folder on the table. The papers scattered like wounded birds. They were copies from the notary, bank printouts, emails. Robert had warned me the lawyer's office had rejected the transaction, but I didn't expect him to react like this, with so much hate. "What is this?" I asked, faking confusion. "Don't play dumb," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You knew I was about to sell this house." "Sell it? Without asking me?" "It was mine too," he said, though we both knew he was lying. "No, Julian, this house isn't for sale." "Of course," he laughed bitterly. "It's not for sale because you, with your scheming, blocked everything. I only protected what belongs to me." He got closer, his eyes blazing. "What did you gain, old man, ruining me, making me look like a thief?" "I didn't need to," I said calmly. "You did that all by yourself." For a moment, silence filled the house. We could only hear the clock in the hall and the faint hum of the fan. Julian stared at me with a hatred so pure it was almost pitiful. "Your whole life, thinking you're a saint," he said, clenching his fists, "but you're nothing but a manipulator." "Watch it, Julian," I replied, looking him in the eye. "You are living proof of what happens when someone confuses love with permission." That enraged him. He hit the table. He knocked a chair to the floor. The noise made Teresa poke her head out her window. I raised a hand, signaling to her not to worry. Julian kept yelling, "Everything I have I owe to you. That's what you always wanted me to feel, right? An eternal debt. No, son, I wanted you to feel gratitude, not guilt." "Lies," his voice broke. "You made me weak, you made me dependent, and now—" He stopped, breathing hard. "Now you're stealing from me." And then I saw it. I saw something in his eyes besides rage. I saw fear. Not fear of losing money, but fear of facing what he had done. For an instant, I thought he would break. But no, his pride was stronger than his soul. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and threw one on the table. "There, the house key. I don't want it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can keep all of it, but don't expect me to ever set foot in this damn tomb again." He walked to the door but stopped before leaving. "And don't think you've won so easy. I can still contest your paperwork." "Go ahead," I said with a serene smile. "I invite you to try." He left and slammed the door so hard the dining room window rattled. The echo resonated in my bones, but not in my soul. Because in that slam, I understood there was nothing left to mourn. The blood we shared had run dry. That night, I stayed alone in the living room, with the papers scattered everywhere. I picked them up one by one. Each sheet told the story of his greed. Photocopies, signatures, emails where he pretended to be me. It was all there, like a case file for the soul. I put everything in a new folder. I labeled it in my own handwriting, "Final Truth," and put it inside the wooden box. I poured myself a glass of wine. I hadn't had a drink since Lucy died, but that night I toasted to her silent wisdom, her foresight, her love that guided me even from the great beyond. "You did it, my love," I whispered. We taught him without raising a hand. The next day, Julian didn't show up. He didn't call either. But the neighborhood sure talked. The rumors traveled like smoke. That Michael's son had tried to sell the house, that the bank had reported him, that the father had exposed him. And even though I didn't say a single word, the truth already had its own voice. Teresa came by at noon with a plate of chicken and rice. "I heard the argument," she said. "Are you okay?" "Perfectly. And your son?" "Sometimes, Teresa, there are children who need to lose everything to start finding themselves." She nodded sadly. "This is hard, what you're going on, Michael." It was harder living a lie. Now, all that's left is to wait for life to do its work. That afternoon, the sky turned gray. The wind began to blow hard, as if trying to erase the remnants of the past. I sat on the porch, the box on my lap, and watched the dry leaves roll down the street. I thought about my wife, about the young carpenter I was, about the boy Julian once was, and how, without meaning to, life had closed the circle. Because in the end, I understood. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for justice and peace. And that peace, at last, had arrived. That night I slept deeply. No dreams, no jolts, just a gentle silence, like that of those who know their destiny is already written, and that the final chapter will write itself. And as the wind beat against the windows, I thought of the phrase Lucy used to say when something was over. What breaks in silence also heals in silence. I closed my eyes with a smile because I knew that at dawn, the silence would bring its final gift. They say the worst battles make no noise, that the real wars are won in silence, with patience, with time. And I had been waiting months for this moment. Every word, every signature, every faked gesture had been one more step toward this morning. I woke up early. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops, painting the air with that golden color that always reminded me of Lucy. I drank my coffee slowly, sitting on the porch, looking at the empty street. I knew my son would return that day, not because he missed me, but because desperate men always return to the place where they think they still have power. And I wasn't wrong. Mid-morning, I heard the sound of his car's engine. I recognized the rumble before I saw it. His arrival was a spectacle of arrogance. He parked carelessly, got out with his phone in his hand, and didn't even close the car door. He was dressed as always, excessively. Shiny watch, expensive cologne, dark sunglasses. But there was something new in his eyes, something broken. "Morning, old man," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Julian." "I came to talk." "To talk or to demand?" I asked without getting up. "To fix things?" I just watched him. That word, fix, sounded hollow. In his mouth, it didn't mean reconciliation. It meant strategy. "Come in," I said. "The house is the same, just a little emptier now." He came in, looked around, and frowned. The place was clean, tidy, but in the center of the living room, there was something new, a table with a white cloth and an envelope on top. The envelope had his name on it. Julian saw it right away. "What's that?" "Your surprise," I replied, pouring myself more coffee. He approached it cautiously. The envelope had a notary's seal and a note from me on the top. "For my son, on the day he decides to return to talk." He laughed in disbelief. "What, you're writing letters like a prophet now?" "No, I'm writing truths." "And what's inside?" "Open it and see." He did. Inside was a copy of the will, a bank document, and a handwritten letter. His eyes moved quickly, jumping from line to line until they stopped on one underlined sentence. "Any action of sale or transfer carried out without the owner's consent will be considered fraud and reported to the authorities." His face went pale. "What is this?" he asked. "Your lesson," I said calmly. "You reported me?" "No, you reported yourself." He threw the papers on the table. "This is crazy. You can't do this to me." "I can," I replied, "and I already have." "What did you do, old man?" "I prepared everything so that when the bank reviewed your movements, they would realize you used my name, my signature, and my address without authorization. They already have the proof." "What proof?" "The proof you generated, the emails, the copies, the digital records." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, I saw real fear in his face, not rage, not wounded pride. Fear. "No, you can't." "Oh, I can, but don't worry, you're not going to jail." "Then?" "The bank won't press charges if you return the documents, sign a waiver of any right to this property, and leave the country." He stumbled a step back. "Leave the country? Where?" "Wherever you want, but far away from here." The silence became so thick you could hear his ragged breathing. "And if I don't?" "Then the case will be opened. And believe me, banks don't forgive fraud." "Why are you doing this to me?" he asked, his voice a thread. "Because you asked for it. Because you left me for dead. Because you sold off my life before my heart even stopped beating." He collapsed into a chair. His hands were shaking. For the first time in years, he wasn't the haughty man who thought he ruled the world. He was a lost little boy, and that hurt me more than anything else. I went over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Julian, you still have time to change. This isn't revenge. It's a door. If you decide to walk through it, you can start over. But if you don't, you'll just keep falling." He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, defeated. Then, without looking up, he said, "And the money? The money already has an owner." "Who?" "Memory." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means that nothing you covet is worth more than what you threw on the curb the day you thought I was dying." He got up and walked to the door. Before he left, he looked at me one last time. "Someday you're going to be all alone for real, old man." "No, son," I said serenely. "Someday you're going to understand that you're the one who's alone." When the sound of the engine faded, I opened the window. The fresh air rushed in, moving the curtains. The house smelled different. For the first time in a long time, it smelled like freedom. On the table, the open envelope was still there. Under the letter, there was another sheet Julian hadn't seen, a copy addressed to the Southern Trust Bank with the final instruction: "When Mr. Julian Gomez waives his share, transfer the remaining funds to the Lucy Gomez Foundation account. Purpose: scholarships for the children of retired laborers." I read the documents in the wooden box, closed the lid, and rested my hand on it. I felt that Lucy, from somewhere, was with me. Her voice echoed in my mind, soft, calm. "Now, Michael, now you can rest." That night I sat on the porch again. The neighborhood lights came on, one by one, and the murmur of life continued. Teresa approached, wearing her gray scarf. "Is everything all right, Michael?" she asked. "Everything, Teresa. Finally, everything." "And your son found his surprise. And what was inside?" "A truth that took him a lifetime to learn," she smiled, though she didn't fully understand. I did. The surprise wasn't the document or the trap or the lost money. The real surprise was seeing myself free from fear. And in that moment, I knew the end was near. But this time, I wasn't afraid. Because at last, the old carpenter had finished his final piece, a lesson carved into his own son's soul. Silence has always seemed to me the best witness to the truth, and this time, it would be the one to speak for me. I knew Julian would be back, not out of love, but out of curiosity. Men like him can't stand not having the last word. So before my body failed me, I left a sealed letter on the table with his name written in my best script. Not a letter of reproach, but of memory. That night the air was heavier than usual. It was hard to breathe, but I felt no fear, just a strange peace, as if my soul were already packing its last belongings for the journey. "Lucy," I thought, "I'm tired of holding up what others broke, tired of waiting for gratitude where there was only ego. But I'm also grateful because I understood that my mission wasn't to change my son, but to teach him, with my own mistakes, what it means to lose everything without losing yourself." 3 days later, when Julian walked through the door again, the house smelled of old wood and absence. Teresa greeted him with moist eyes. "Your father passed away last night," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just stood still, as if the words couldn't reach his chest. He walked to the living room, where the wooden box was open on the table, and on top of it, the letter. Trembling, he took it. The envelope had the same scent he remembered from childhood, the lavender perfume his mother used. He opened it with clumsy hands, and his father's voice, written in blue ink, began to echo in his mind. "My son, if you are reading this, it means my body is no longer with me, but my voice is still with you, like the echo of things one never dares to say in life. I'm not writing to judge you or to remind you of your mistakes. I'm writing to remind you of mine. I gave you too much, Julian. I protected you so much that I robbed you of the chance to understand what it costs to earn something. And because of that, you became weak, even though the world thought you were strong. When you threw my furniture on the curb, it didn't hurt me because of the objects. It hurt because I saw in them all the years I believed you had learned love. But I didn't hate you, son. I just ached. Lucy always said that children aren't inheritances, they're loans, and that someday, life reclaims them. That day has come for you, even if you don't understand it yet. I know you feel betrayed by what I did, but it wasn't punishment. It was a mirror. I just wanted you to feel the weight of your own decisions so that when you have a son one day, you'll know how to hold him without breaking him. The money you wanted so badly is gone for you. But there is something I am leaving you, even if you can't touch it. My name. Do with it what you never knew how to do with your life. Honor it. There is no inheritance more valuable than a clean conscience, nor any punishment more cruel than the guilt of someone who knows they could have loved and didn't. If you ever return to this house, don't look for gold or papers. Look for forgiveness. It's in the walls, in the air, in the smell of the coffee your mother brewed every morning. There, son. There, I am still waiting for you. Your father, Michael Gomez. Julian let the letter fall to the table. The tears he had held back for years exploded from his face. He fell to his knees. The sound of his sobbing filled the house, an old, thick sob from a child who had never learned to ask for forgiveness. Teresa approached slowly. "May I?" she asked, pointing to the letter. He nodded, unable to speak. She read fragments of it aloud, her hands shaking. "You had a great father, Julian." He shook his head. "No, I had a saint, and I treated him like trash." His words came out in gasps. I just wanted to be somebody." "And he just wanted you to be good," Teresa said. "That was enough for him." Julian looked around. The clock was still on the wall, marking the same hours as always. The evening shadows came through the window, staining everything a faint orange. It was as if time had stopped, waiting for him to understand what had always been right in front of his eyes. He got up with effort, took the letter, and walked to the workshop out back. There, on the table, were his father's tools, clean, orderly. He ran his hand over an old chisel, the same one Michael had used to teach him how to carve his first piece of wood. On the workbench was a small, unfinished figure, a hand holding a heart. Underneath, a piece of paper with a single word written on it: forgiveness. Julian pressed his forehead against the wood and broke down crying. Inside him, something shattered. But this time, it wasn't destruction. It was the beginning of healthy guilt, the kind that cleanses, the kind that transforms. He stayed in the house that night, in silence. He didn't turn on any lights or the TV. He just listened to the sounds of the place, the same ones his father had heard so many times. The creak of the floor, the whistle of the wind, the tick-tock of the clock. And he understood that this was the true legacy, the peace of a man who died without fear, knowing his story no longer belonged to pain. At dawn, he went out on the porch with the letter in his hands. The sky was clear. The air smelled of bread and coffee. Teresa saw him and came over. "Will you stay here?" she asked. "I don't know, but I want to start over." "Your father would be happy to hear that." "He won't hear it, will he?" "Of course he will," she said, looking at the sky. Good men always listen from somewhere. Julian smiled weakly, looked at the letter one more time, and folded it carefully. "Thanks, old man," he whispered. "I promise not to waste your name again." And for the first time in a long time, he breathed without guilt, because he finally understood that you don't ask for forgiveness. You prove it. When a man dies, what he leaves behind aren't his things but the echo of what he was. And that echo, even as my body rested, continued to resonate in the streets where I spent my life. The whole neighborhood spoke of me, not for my mistakes, but for the story that remained within those old walls, where a father's voice and a son's silence once sounded. Teresa was the first to tell it. She'd say that every afternoon, walking past the house, she could hear the strike of the hammer in the workshop, as if I were still there, carving life with patience. The neighborhood kids grew up hearing fragments of the story. Old man Michael, the carpenter who taught his son with a letter. And the adults, when they repeated it, would lower their voices because they knew that story wasn't just mine. It was theirs too. Julian stayed in the house for a few weeks. He didn't talk much. He spent his mornings in the workshop cleaning tools, organizing planks, asking the air for forgiveness. He didn't cry anymore, but his silence had a different sound, that of sincere regret. One day the kids saw him fixing the park fence and planting flowers where weeds had been. No one asked him to. He did it alone, in silence, as if he needed to give something back to the world. Teresa would tell how, every Sunday, she saw him go into the church with the letter folded in his pocket. He never let it go. And when the pastor spoke of forgiveness, he would lower his head and smile just slightly, with the expression of someone who understood too late, but finally understood. The neighborhood began to change. People started to speak more tenderly of the elderly. Children visited their parents with flowers. Grandchildren helped their grandparents cross the street. Not out of fear of dying, but out of fear of not having loved enough. And every time someone remembered my name, they did it with respect. Michael wasn't a perfect man, Teresa would say, but he knew how to die in peace, and not everyone can say that. A few months later, the foundation bearing Lucy's name opened its doors. The first scholarship recipient was a young man from the neighborhood, the son of a retired carpenter. When Julian met him, he gave him one of my old tools and said, "This was my father's. He wasn't the best carpenter in the world, but he was the best man I ever knew." The boy smiled, not fully understanding, and in that gesture, Julian felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child, clean pride without guilt. Over time, the story became almost a legend. They said that on quiet nights, the sound of the hammer could still be heard from the house, as if I were still working in there. And maybe it was true. Because men don't die when they stop breathing. They die when no one learns anything from them anymore. Julian, meanwhile, continued to change. He opened a small community workshop where he taught the neighborhood kids how to carve wood. Above the entrance, he hung a hand-painted sign, Michael Gomez Workshop. Forgiveness is built too. The first time I saw it, from that place where eyes and years no longer hurt, I knew he had finally understood. Life didn't take anything from him. It gave him the chance to start over, but this time, with clean hands. Now, when the wind blows in the afternoons, I sometimes think I hear his voice among the trees in the yard. He doesn't call me old man with anger, but with affection. And when he strikes the wood, it sounds different. Firm, patient, at peace. The house is no longer a wound. It's a living inheritance, a lesson that keeps breathing amid the dust of the workshop, the laughter of the neighborhood, and the voice of those who still believe that true love can't be bought or inherited. It is learned. Because in the end, that's what I wanted to leave the world. The certainty that no betrayal is stronger than a heart willing to forgive. They say that when the soul says goodbye to the world, time stops for a few seconds, just long enough to look back and understand everything. That's what I felt when my heart, tired but calm, stopped beating. There was no fear, just a warm light, like the reflection of the sun on freshly polished wood. Since then, I walk among the echoes. I no longer have a body, but I have memory. And in that memory live my days, my loves, my silences, and my mistakes. Sometimes I visit my house. I find it different. The walls painted, flowers growing in the garden, the workshop full of laughing young people. And in the middle of them, Julian, my son, his hands covered in dust, teaching them to carve just as I taught him. Every time he raises the hammer, I feel a slight tremor, as if my soul is still working by his side. He doesn't see me, but he feels me. Sometimes he stops, looks toward the corner where I used to sit, and smiles with moist eyes. Then I know he hears me, because between us there's no longer any distance or guilt or silence, only the peace that comes when the truth has been spoken and love has been understood. The neighborhood changed, too. Every corner holds a piece of my story. The park bench where Lucy and I met, Teresa's shop with my photo in an old frame, the clock in the hall that still marks the hour my heart stopped. But none of it hurts anymore. Because I learned that death doesn't erase, it reveals. And what it reveals is simple, that everything we loved, if it was true, remains alive in some way. One afternoon, Julian closed the workshop and stayed behind, alone. The sun filtered through the window, gilding the air. He raised the hammer and gave one last strike on the table. The sound echoed, clean, round, perfect. That was my last strike, even though his hands delivered it. And in that instant, I knew I could leave in peace, because my son was no longer looking for money, or power, or redemption. He was looking for something bigger, meaning. As I drifted away, the house fell silent. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of love fulfilled, of forgiveness granted, of the circle closed. And so, I ended my story as I always wanted, not with a shout, but with the soft sound of a hammer on wood, marking the eternal rhythm of a father who at last was understood.